say who you want to address your question to. Questions? Renzo, I know you always have some. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll get it started. It's to whoever wants to answer it. You guys have heard this from me before, and I get on my soapbox every time. I own a Webster New World Collegiate Dictionary. It has 1,700 pages in it. All of the words of the English language are there. There's geographical stuff about big cities and countries. The Constitution is in there. The Declaration of Independence is in there. A lot of good stuff in 1,700 pages. Obamacare is about 2,800 pages. You heard all kinds of stuff about that. Nancy Pelosi said, you got to pass it so you know what's in it. These folks talked about nobody wanted to read it tonight. Terrible thing is our tax code. 70,000 pages. That's like 41 or 42 dictionaries. How many of you in here think that anybody knows what's in that thing? Nobody does, right? Every page has been constructed by lobbyists working with lawyers to put in special loopholes so that they can get away from paying taxes. Things like General Electric doesn't pay any corporate tax, right? Additional child tax credits. $4 billion a year are going out of this country into Mexico for nieces, nephews, and so forth of approximately 2 million illegal aliens. That's stuff that, money that should be staying in this country, taking care of things for us. 70,000 pages. And every year, the congressmen are adding 500 new pages of junk. Catherine, I think, hinted a little bit on the fair tax. Now, I'd like to know who of you understand the fair tax and support it. The fair tax is about a 150-page bill in the House, sponsored by Tim Scott, among other people. In the Senate, sponsored by Jim DeMint, among other people. And it's a tax that would repeal the 16th Amendment, do away with the whole 70,000 pages of crap, and start all over with a 150-page bill, which everybody in this room could read it in the evening and understand. How do you guys stand on that?
Okay, Ms. Catherine.
I think there'd be a lot of H&R Block people out of a job. But I am totally for the fair tax. I understand it. It's very simple, and it does exactly what America tax used to be. It used to be tariffs. That's where the government collected all their taxes, is goods, services, and tariffs. That's where the taxes should come from. It shouldn't come from your labor. Because all income tax is a tether from my pocket to Washington, D.C. That's all it is. And you're right, the people on the very top don't pay taxes. They don't. And Mr. Soros will sit there all day long. Oh, you can tax me more, you can tax me more, because he knows that the 70,000 pages you're talking about. He knows he can hide his money offshore, he knows he can hide his money here and there, and he never has to pay taxes. And all those corporations he owns doesn't pay taxes either, because you know what they do? Take a Bill Gates for example. Mr. Bill Gates, you have X number of taxes you need to pay. He goes, you know what? This widget here costs $10. I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm going to just make this widget $15 and my consumers can pay my taxes. Am I right? Am I right? Absolutely. Plus the fair tax will also take care of all those people who are not here legally, because they'll all be paying those same taxes. So I'm for a fair tax. I'm for abolishing the 16th Amendment. As a matter of fact, I think the National Tea Party has put it in their agenda to abolish the 16th Amendment by 2020. So, yes.
Chad,
I think that the fair tax is a great solution. I think what we need to do in addressing the tax code is it needs to be fairer. It needs to be flatter, potentially. That is another solution. I think the solutions on the table in terms of the fair tax, which is a consumption-oriented tax, or reducing dramatically the tax rate if we're not able to achieve some other system, is also a way to go about it. regardless, we need to scrap the tax code. You know, you have an army of lobbyists on K Street who go in there every year, as you said. It's an entire industry. You talk about the cottage industry here at home of tax preparers, which would go away, which is one aspect. We really need to do away with that whole industry on K Street in Washington, who are the folks that propagate all of these regulations and go in. If we had a much lower rate, and we had a flat rate, and we had a tax that actually was paid more broadly. I mean, half of Americans don't pay income taxes, and that's a large part of the problem. And that is the beginning of the end of our republic, where you have a majority who are getting to a point where they can continue to vote themselves benefits that they don't pay for. Now, I think it needs to be lowered on the personal side. It also needs to be lowered on the corporate side. You're talking about money going offshore through the income tax. The other part of money going offshore, the other problem we have, is with the corporate tax, because our corporate tax is not competitive in the global environment. It's way too high, so it causes companies like Apple to transfer a lot of their royalty revenues offshore. So they're holding that money and making that money and paying those taxes they otherwise would be paying here. They're paying them in foreign countries. They're paying them at a lower rate. If you had a rational tax code and you had a much lower rate and you did away with all the loopholes so that you don't have huge corporations like GE paying nothing, they're paying something, but they're paying something that's reasonable, that won't force them to offshore those profits, then that would be a significant factor in improving our economy. So I think we need to begin with scrapping the code as it is. If we replace it with a fair tax, I think that's a great option. I think you have to look at all options that are on the table in terms of reducing the rate and making it a flat rate. But at any point, I think you ought to be able to get down to a return that we all understand and can fill out on the back of a postcard, because taxes need to be understandable and taxes need to be predictable, both for consumers and for businesses. When taxes are not predictable and they're so hard to understand, you have to hire lawyers to understand them. That's a problem for business. It's a problem that impedes investment and hurts job growth, quite frankly, in this country.
Yeah, I agree. I like what you're saying. But one thing you mentioned, flat tax. That's still a tax on production. So philosophically, it's different from a consumption tax.
That's true.
And it penalizes people who want to work and make money, because it takes it from the consumption tax. You pay your tax when you buy something.
That's right.
Illegal aliens want to go buy something, they pay a tax. A drug dealer
I agree
wants to buy a new car, he
right.
pays a tax on it, okay?
Philosophically,
So
I agree. I absolutely agree with you, and I would personally be more in favor of a consumption tax. I think we've got to look at what we achieve, but I agree. It is a tax on production that's non-productive to the economy.
Good. Thank you.
Larry, how about you?
As far as the state of South Carolina goes, I first got acquainted with the fair tax through the Neil Boortz radio show several years ago, and I kind of thought it was a good idea. But I think his name is John Stenberger, is the chairman or the head of the South Carolina Fair Tax Association. They have a bill already written that kind of mirrors the federal bill. It's written for the state of South Carolina. It has been filed in both the House and the Senate, and it has sat there in those committees. Nikki Haley had a big push this year to make a fundamental overhaul of the tax deal. Nothing has been accomplished in the House and the Senate in the way of legislation to do that. There was a bill sitting right in committee that would be a fundamental overhaul of the tax system. The business of taking and changing the current system, scrapping the book and then writing a new book about lower levels and stuff like that, guess what? The current system started off at a low level. Okay? That's doing the same thing the same way. The fair tax is a totally different concept. Catherine touched on it. I want to reiterate what she said. Businesses do not pay taxes, people. They may be taxed. They may be charged with paying some money to the government for this activity or that activity or somewhere, but the business does not pay that tax. You pay it. The business takes the money it costs to send to the state in the form of that tax, and they suck it out of their consumers in the price that they charge for their service or their goods. Businesses do not pay tax. So why does the government put them in the position of being tax collectors? That's not what they're supposed to do. If they make widgets, let them make widgets. Don't make them be tax collectors too. That's dividing their efforts. They can make better and more and cheaper widgets if they can concentrate on that. But they have to spend time on learning to be a tax collector. That's wrong. Fair tax. South Carolina has legislation on the table in the committees. I've already signed the pledge that I will support trying to get those out of committee and support the fair tax when it hits the floor of the House.
Thank you.
Fair tax is a consumption tax, yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
What is dangerous about a consumption tax? You don't spend money, there is no tax. We can all afford to stop spending money. You can stop spending money in a lot of different ways. Not to be rude or anything of that nature, but Americans are known for overeating. We could eat less. I mean, we can cut spending 100,000 different ways. My idea is stop spending. Stop spending our money.
Yeah.
Stop. Cut taxes in half and stop spending our money. That's what I say.
Colleen?
Which is to be, well, to all of you, if you have time to answer. Any current bills or some bills that have died, like in the Senate or House, like, well, mainly for, I guess would be for the businesses, for government regulations on them. If there would be a way or what you can do to either get those, either bills or somehow help those businesses get out of the government regulations that have already been under those regulations, and sort of revamp that, and so that they won't have regulations on the businesses anymore. How would you go about doing that, even though they are now under certain government regulations? That's hurting the businesses and hurting businesses from coming into the state and from going out of state. How would you resolve that issue?
That sounds more like a state level.
Or is that state level?
Part
Okay,
of it.
well, okay.
I would love to entertain that thought for a moment. We have already begun, in the state of South Carolina and 25 other states have already begun the process that's going to be necessary to get out from under excessive federal regulation. And that is the lawsuit against the Obamacare bill. If that lawsuit is won, that's going to set a precedent that there are limits on what the federal government can do. Now, Catherine mentioned the 18 enumerated powers that are found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's 18 specific things that the Constitution says the federal government should be doing. There's been a couple of others added in a couple of the amendments, but very few enumerated powers there. The 10th Amendment, which was part of the original bill, Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment says anything that this Constitution doesn't say the federal government can do is reserved for the states and the people. Now, the South Carolina and 25 other states have already taken the first step to rectify this problem by taking the Obamacare case in the law. Now, here's another situation, though. We need to follow that up after Obamacare. We need to start with our EPA regulations. There's nothing in the federal Constitution that says the federal government can tell the Granger Power Plant what kind of emissions it has coming out of its smokestack. It's not in the Constitution. But yet, the process, the process that has led us to this point has allowed that to stand, that regulation to stand as law. Okay? But the process has been started. Now, what we need to do is, once we win this one, then we need to go one step further. Guess what Article 2, Section 2, the second paragraph of the U.S. Constitution says? It says that if there is a lawsuit and a state is a member of the suit, if there is a case and the state is a member, the original jurisdiction for that case is the Supreme Court of the United States. That's exactly what it says. You can look it up in your pocket copy there, and mine's a little raggeder than hers, but it's in here too. Why did Arizona go to a federal court to file their appeal to, all that? The Constitution says that the Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction. It's not written in a foreign language. It's not written in secret code. It's in English. And even a sixth grader can understand it. So I'm going to propose that the state of South Carolina, at every step of the way, and every way they can, and victory upon victory, take these cases and start off, after this Obamacare thing, the next thing we knew is we need to start off by forcing them to accept the Supreme Court as the original jurisdiction point for when a state files suit against the federal government.
Do any of you three?
One thing that we have is a particular problem on the federal side of the equation, and I agree. I mean, most of these authorities need to be reserved to the state wherever possible. But a huge problem at the federal level, beyond what Congress is doing to us legislatively, is what the bureaucrats are doing to us in the rulemaking process. Because you know, we have a legislative process to create laws, and we need to certainly look at the constitutional limits of that and the limits of federal power. But what so often actually happens beyond that, and so many of the rules that you see propagated at the federal level come from these agencies and don't even have review of the legislative process. The agencies, you know, how many of you are familiar with the Federal Register, this huge book that is published every single day that comes out that has all of the announcements and laws and all of the official business relative to the federal government? Many agencies publish rules and regulations that they feel they have the authority to do under whatever legislation that's in place they're referring to, and they propagate all of the rules that aren't specifically debated within the legislature, and a lot of those are never challenged. Congress never takes action on them to change them, review them, reduce them, throw them out, do away with them, and that's a big part of the regulatory issue that we have, you know, with every agency such as the EPA.